is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. The joke last week went so hard, he's still recovering from it. Stu Horvath.
It's true. That was a really good one.
Genuine pop, and I'm not even going to try to top this week. Also, we got a guest, longtime friend of the show, Max Moon, is here to talk about Abyss of Hallucinations, collected edition, dropping on Halloween from Exalted Funeral, only on Kickstarter. Max, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
We have been, and I'm comfortable speaking for Stu at this moment. We've been fans of your work since we first seen it. Each book that you put out is better than the last. You sent a gold flake edition of one of them to us, and it's one of my prized zine possessions. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. Why don't you tell our listeners about Abyss of Hallucinations?
All right. Awesome. Yeah. Also big fan of the show, so it's wonderful to be here. Thank you. The Abyss of Hallucinations is I describe it as sort of a nihilistic jaunt through the abyss. It is a MÖRK BORG setting, all and taken inspiration from the Book of Lies by Aleister Crowley. So we've got that deep occult influence. One of the things I've said about this a few times is just that when I've been doing this work with trying to bring more occult stuff into MÖRK BORG is like the perfect system for playing around with Aleister Crowley's work, because it's so like tongue-in-cheek and nihilistic at the same time, playful and dark, and just it's the perfect blend for me.
You know, it's funny because I see the cover of this book and I've seen your other work, and you know, we've often talked about the satanic panic on this show, and yet when I look at your work, I think a few different things. The first thing is that, oh my gosh, if this had dropped during the satanic panic, those moms would have shit their asses, because like it looks like that book that you find in the bookstore or in the library that you're like, I don't know, I feel kind of dirty taking this out because I feel like maybe something bad is going to happen. Not like Necronomicon level of bad is going to happen, but something not great might occur. And then like my other thought on it is that if there was any book that like some dingus would bring to a game shop as a prop and accidentally open a portal to the other side, this looks like what it is. It is so cool looking.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I love treating the physical object with a certain, I don't know, try to make sure that it is its own precious piece and honors the work inside as well, but thinking about it really holistically too. And yeah, I mean, I definitely was impacted by the satanic panic, and it stuck with me forever. I've got so many beautiful, gross stories about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I when I saw the cover, when I don't know where it was, it might have been in the Discord, or it was floating around, and Derek Kinsman, who did the layout for my book, and I were like, he dropped it in chat directly to me, and he's like, look at this. And we both like stared at that picture and got angry about it for a couple minutes. Just like, oh, it's so good. Like, how dare he be so good? I hate it. You know what I mean? Like, it's so beautiful, it makes me angry.
That's like goals right there, right? Like that's the best review I feel like I can get. Yeah, I love working on book covers. I have for a long time, but one of the things I enjoyed about this process is, one, I had been imagining something totally different, and then one day just sort of was like, I'm just gonna like poke around and experiment. And I do a lot of bookbinding as well. I'd done like not too long ago a bookbinding class using like pre-industrial gold tooling methods and stuff, and so it kind of was like I keep a collection of like old antique books that I just get inspired by covers and things. And so it was just fun to kind of riff on that and think about like, what if I think about every shape in Illustrator as a stamped tool and try and like play with that and like play with, I don't know. So extremely fun process putting together that cover. And just like once it got going, it was hideous at first. And then I was like, oh no, I got it. And by the end of it, I was like, oh shit, this is actually the cover. This isn't just me playing around. This is gonna stick. So
it's cool. It comes through. The fact that you're a bookbinder and you appreciate that art, I think, comes through in the whole everything that I've seen connected to the collected edition. It's just like those backgrounds, the marbleized ink backgrounds and everything. It all speaks to a love of books, and we don't really get books that look like that anymore. It's an old-fashioned thing, but it feels new again. I think that's kind of cool too, because it harkens back to sort of Crowley's era, but it also feels fresh and new, especially for a role-playing game.
yeah, thank you. That's definitely something that's on my mind a lot because I do just have that love of books, and I often lament that I'm like, God damn it, I love this book, but why didn't they just make it a little nicer? I don't know.
Well, you know, to that point, like, I think it's a very interesting thing when it comes to the occult and the darker side of tabletop role playing.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to try to make a sinister looking tome and just like completely cop out with the idea of like, well, but it's supposed to look like this, and if it doesn't look like this, it's not like a sinister looking tome. Whereas your work has a certain level of reverence for the subject matter and for the occult, where the sinisterness really lies within the elegance of the design in a very almost seductive way, which I think is, you know, truly the way that the occult and the darker side of things should be approached when it comes to books and RPGs. You know, keeping with that like classic subversive idea of what a tabletop RPG could be.
You just that's my inner world right there. Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that. That is absolutely something that's on my mind a lot. I mean, the color scheme for Abyss of Hallucinations, when I start with the zines with the pink and metallic white and gold and stuff, is like, I do embrace sort of the sinister side of things, but I also think that like one of my frustrations in modern tropes of like magic, horror, dark side, like is that sometimes we, as things like mimetically reproduce, they get more and more one-dimensional. And so I really try to play up this like duality, unified elements of like, and that sort of pushing in this other direction of like, I do think that treating something with that reverence empowers it with like for the person picking it up too, right? Like it can change that experience a little bit. So yeah, I don't know how to be as articulate as I'd like on that topic, but
well, I suddenly thought of the recent Call of Cthulhu video game, which I bounced off of so hard because it was so over the top, like dressed in the trappings of horror, you know, from the very beginning. Like there was no environment in the game that was just a normal street. Everything was just like absolutely terrifying. Like there's like dead sharks on the beach. It's like what is going on? Why is like everything so over the top? Like the idea for me anyway to do a successful Call of Cthulhu game is to start with reality and then to slowly subvert it over time until you get to something that's really deeply horrifying. And like it's sort of the same thing, you know, to bring it to the book. It's the difference between an actual grimoire, which would look basically like, you know, ideally a very nice book that's on the shelf like any other book, versus, you know, the Necronomicon from Evil Dead, which has like, you know, a monster face on it. Like, nobody has books like that.
Well, you know, people who like collect books, and you'd imagine that a person who dabbles in the occult would collect books, would probably, to your points, Stu, have like a very nice book collection that they would dust and they would keep nice because there is that like respect for those books. Well, and, you know, I agree with you, Stu, with what you're saying with that, you know, basic in reality and like taking the horror from the reality and expanding it into the world. Like, you know, we've all seen what the Necronomicon looks like. And a lot of times when you deal with horror in books, it just ends up being a Necronomicon knockoff.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of thing that they're showing you, whatever kind of tone that they're showing you. Like, I'm kind of way over the idea of like this is the sinister book, because in my mind, like, you have the Necronomicon and then you have like the book from Hocus Pocus, and I just kind of feel like it's an even playing field from there.
Well, books bound in human skin just look like books because it's just leather. No, for real. Like, I've seen, you see that they have a lot of it. There was a point in time where a lot of anatomy books were bound in human skin, and they just look like books. They take on an air of the sinister because it's human skin, and that like makes us feel weird. Mm-hmm. But they just look like books, and that's kind of that's sort of what I'm getting at.
Yes. Yeah.
Max is just like, yes.
I love this.
Jack Nicholson gif.
Well, now that we've talked a bunch about the outside, why don't you tell the listeners a bit about the inside? I mean, we could, I feel like we could do a whole hour on like just books and tomes and bookbind and all that stuff. But let's talk about the guts of this beautiful book.
Yeah. So a little bit of context in terms of like this project has been like started as volumes of zines. So we got volume 1, volume 2, volume 3 is getting produced at the same time as the hardcover collected edition, but volume 3, that's like the end of the setting. There may still be more like supplementary stuff like pamphlet adventures coming down the line. But yeah, so it's a MÖRK BORG setting, all based on the Book of Lies. So the Book of Lies is also available as a beautiful matching hardcover alongside Abyss of Hallucinations, with this idea that as you're using the setting, there's all the setting material that I've created, but I try to make a lot of the key references direct by giving you chapter numbers from the Book of Lies. There's plenty of stuff where I'm like, oh, I'm not telling them about this. They can find it if they want to. But yeah, so I've got like all sorts of setting material along, like going from like names, classes, deities, introductory adventure, like randomly rolled magical orders, creatures.
Do you find that the Book of Lies was like a sort of like a Dungeon Master's Guide before the Dungeon Master's Guide? Just like a collection of odd pieces of advice. When I say Dungeon Master's Guide, I mean like the 1978 Gary Gygax one that's sort of like a mess of rumination and like preoccupation.
So yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. The Book of Lies is a particularly weird one in that it is a collection of these chapters are like 1-page like verse chapters, and it varies in terms of like, is this one just Crowley like ripping on some asshole he doesn't like and then using like numerology to amplify the joke, and then others are like, oh, this is like deep meaningful commentary on obliteration of consciousness. So it like varies. There's like comments about his like restaurant and the staff supplicating themselves to him and stuff. I don't know. It's a bizarre collection. That's one of the things I adore about it, is that I talk about this like unification of duality and stuff, right? Like it really is multidimensional, and like you can go from being like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm having like I can unpack this chapter forever. And then you are like, as you're unpacking it, you're like, that's a really dumb joke inserted in like deeply meaningful content. And I love it. Or just like him talking about being annoyed. Yeah.
And that's like the game table experience, right? Like no matter how serious the game, everybody's always kind of cracking jokes at some level at some point, right?
Absolutely. I will add here too that like I mentioned this a little bit with the like sort of mimetic replication of like tropes and whatever, and how things become more one-dimensional. One of the big appeals for me in incorporating Crowley's work into role-playing games has always been magic in role-playing games feels frequently to be less strange than magic in history. Mm-hmm. And I think unfortunately sometimes as things like grow and reproduce, fiction becomes less strange than reality. And that's one of the things I've always like in magic, in role-playing games, specifically one role-playing game that has like an ampersand in it. It seems like all magic is just some sort of like blasting. Here's another ejaculation, but this one is cold. This one is hot. This one is electric. They're all just like, here, it's like Zardoz, the gun is good. And in human history, magic is way more fascinating and weird. Like, let me use the skin of this guy's legs and put a coin in the scrotum so I can be wealthy forever. So those are two really different things. So pulling from text from like Crowley has been really helpful for me too, and breaking up my own like preconceptions that are like colored by pop evolution of ideas of magic. Yep. That's my rant.
I need to ruminate for a second. No, I think that that's really fascinating. It's something that I think about a lot. I've never really put it into words, I don't think, because I've just not had an opportunity. But the way that role-playing games naturally systemize things is sort of at odds with the way that like Western occult traditions are very sort of intuitive and improvisational. They seem like anyway, like you said, it's always like odd sympathies between, perceived sympathies between things seems to be the foundation for it. And it's really hard to bring that kind of flavor in to role-playing games. I recently posted about those other magic zines, which try to bring folk magic traditions into generic role-playing kind of framework. And they're really interesting, but if you put them in the context of Dungeons and Dragons, they immediately become overpowered and kind of like novel but useless. Where I think that the Crowley stuff is interesting because it fuels the whole setting and meshes so well with sort of the doom, gloom, and low power of MÖRK BORG in a way that really they become synergistic in a way that I find interesting.
Thank you.
I don't know if there was a question there, was there?
It is very easy for me to get to go from like, okay, we're talking about the guts of the book and the zines to like shift into, oh, here's some more of my like thoughts about the world.
Well, that's the point, right? That's the fun of it.
It is, yeah. One thing that I do want to mention too is just the artists who have worked on this.
You read my mind. I was about to segue to the artists.
Awesome. I'm just like going there because that's a really important component of the presentation as well, right? The artists are such an integral component of this, and like setting the tone, setting the mood, and like embodying the spirit of the whole thing. And like I just am so excited about the folks I've gotten to work with on this. So that has been another piece that's just been amazing in the process.
And who are some of them?
So the artist that we've got working on this, it's Tom Davis, who goes by Dark Transmissions, who's done these like really gorgeous iconoclastic kind of skeletal portraits of the deities in volume 1, and has done some other pieces like border work. David Hoskins, who I know y'all love and I adore, has done like the creatures for the Abyss and has this like perfect ability to go like weird and blow my mind and keep it like psychedelic and creepy, and then surprise me with like some subtle like symbology that's like pulled from the text too. So that's been amazing. Luciana Lupe Vasconcelos did like the box cover art and is doing more art for the collected edition, including the GM screen, which is like this gigantic, gorgeous tribute to Babylon. That is her work is probably the most directly like, when I look at that is how I feel about Abyss of Hallucinations. I could just like go through everything she's created and been like, the spirit of it is so perfect. And yeah, and Andy Weber has done like the class illustrations, and I think Andy has a particularly strong knack for like completely disrupting my idea of what a character might look like. Like when I give him text for a class and then he comes back with these sketches and I'm like, I love just how like the character opens up, very different than anything I could have expected, and I have learned not to have these expectations, but to just like see where he takes it character wise is super fascinating.
So Luciana in particular is interesting to me because I believe that they don't have a background in role playing games, right? They come from a more esoteric art tradition, right?
Yes, yeah. And that's one where I was familiar with her work via Devil's Supper by Shani Oates, and then the Dungeon Divinations when working on that project. With that was very exciting to me to see her work being brought in for that. Since then, approached her about working on this project because it just seemed like such a good fit, and she's been wonderful to work with. But yeah, I like working with folks from within the role playing game scene, but also like looking at folks who are doing more black metal stuff that like or like metal illustration. Like one artist I didn't mention was Mystic Barbarism, Robin Harris, who's done more work with me on like Demon Lore expansion for 12 years, but also has done a piece for Abyss and is going to be doing some more incredibly gorgeous work. Yeah.
It shifts those preconceptions around a little bit, right? Luciana's work vibrates on a different frequency than a lot of stuff that is baked into the art of folks who are consciously working on role-playing games, because there's like a tradition that they're working in.
Yep.
And like when you mix and match them all, like, and then you get somebody like Hoskins, who is just like another like person whose talent is aggravating.
Yeah, man.
Like his monster illustrations in Abyss 2 are just they're so they're so of the role-playing world, but also of like the metal and music world, and also like you said, like he always has like this ability to kind of like pull out little things that really get to that weird archetypal thing that happens, at least when I look at like the Breton Gauche illustrations, like they seem like part of like our collective unconscious in a weird way, and like there's a little bit of that in Hoskins illustrations that is like really totally unsettling.
Yeah, those illustrations are some of the most inspirational to me, honestly. Like I've looked at those Breton ones so much over the course of like this project and in general outside this project. I frequently grab a book that has all those in it and will just page through and remind myself of how weird things can get.
And they're both weird and strangely prosaic. There's something about that. Like again, like getting back to that reconfiguration. Like most of the demons that are in those illustrations are just sort of like variants of animal human crossovers. There's not a lot that's like that pushes our perception of what a demon as an entity could really be. There's nothing really psychedelic about them. And yet they are, and they mess with my head. I think partly because, and this is just like a total aside that's like very theoretical, but the Breton illustrations sort of remind me in character of the original illustrations for Alice in Wonderland. And I think that there's like a tension between those two that makes them both feel greater and part of like a weird whole that might not otherwise exist for me anyway as a viewer.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, but there is absolutely stylistic similarities between those. I know exactly the Alice in Wonderland illustrations you're talking about. Yeah, that's
yeah. There's weird proportionality choices that are made across both that I think is really interesting, and who knows, maybe it's the same person. I'm pretty sure the Breton, like we don't know anything about that guy. I think
I don't, other than those illustrations. I feel like I knew something at one point about the Alice in Wonderland illustrations, but I don't remember now.
I feel like I'm making a grievous error by not knowing that fellow's name off the top of my head. And like the book is like just out of reach of my headphone set, so I can't reach it. Real quick, I want to make sure. I need to see this. When was Tennille? His name is John Tennille.
Yep.
Okay, he's post. I think he's post Breton. I don't know. Okay.
That's what I was thinking. There's different eras, but they are strikingly similar, I think.
Oh wait, no. The first editions by Macmillan, they're the same same year, 1865. I think that I think that 1868 is the Dictionary Infernal with the Bretons. So it could be the same guy. Who knows?
Interesting.
Well, very cool. Max, do you have any final thoughts on Abyss of Hallucinations Collected Edition?
Yeah, I'm just really excited to be working with the whole like team, the artists, editor, like Exalted Funeral has been phenomenal to work with. I'm so excited to see this like project reach completion and get to this point that it couldn't have been without everybody involved. So that's the main thing I would say is I'm just super grateful for everybody working on it.
Well, dear listener, when you hear this episode, tomorrow will be the launch of the Kickstarter for Abyss of Hallucinations Collected Edition on the most holy day of the year, Halloween. It's going to be on Kickstarter for 30 days. Cannot recommend this book enough. Max, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you on the social medias?
MaxMoonGames.com is my website, but if you want to find me on social media, Instagram's probably the best one for me, and that is games.maxmoon.
Very cool. Well, this has been another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can people find you on the internets?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I have a whole week of Max Moon products already written and ready to go for late 2024. Maybe Abyss of Hallucinations Collected will be among them.
Right on. You can find me across the internet at John McGuire RPG on the Instagram, on the Twitters, or whatever it is now, on the Blue Sky. I'm on TikTok at 321 Action Games. And speaking of 321 Action Games, there is just 3 days left to back the Hotel Exorcist on Kickstarter. We're fully funded, so you are definitely going to get this book. The zine covers by Sally Canarino, the Kickstarter exclusive hardcovers by Charles Ferguson Avery. It's going to be a killer story where you get to play a group of exorcists, demonologists, paranormalists going into a small resort town to help clear out its unwanted guests that stayed far past checkout. Check out the Hotel Exorcist on Kickstarter now. If you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We have behind the scenes looks at Stu's books and the things he's working on. We got the behind the scenes look at 321 Actions and the things that I'm working on as well. We have a set up for early release episodes for as little as $1 a month. You get your episodes at some point on Friday, depending on when we record them in the week. You get them before anybody else does. We also have a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. We have tiers where you can play games with me, tiers where you can play games with Stu. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.